Right. Hey everyone, welcome back to chapters 7 and 8. Before we kind of get into it, I do want to go over a few things. So at the time of recording this, the diversity paper was due yesterday. And so I don't know if that helps kind of putting things into frame, but I just wanted to let everyone know that I uploaded a video where I literally go in and like navigate Canvas and point out like any resources that you guys may not have been aware of, or how to use those resources. So I hope that video helped. And yeah, I'm having class outside today, so I hope the audio doesn't get too glitchy because my laptop headphones are at my office at Texas State and I am not going back for them. They're there until who knows when, and that's just an unfortunate circumstance for me, I guess. But yeah, getting into it, we're going to go over interpersonal communication, developing relationships, self-disclosure, the stages of relational development, and what is conflict. I also will kind of say that this lecture video is going to be a bit longer than they are normally, just because it's going to be the combination of both chapters. And I know that I want to make sure that you guys have enough information to do the quizzes properly. But like I always say, make sure you're still reading because I'm not going to go over everything in detail, and because the questions are they're practically based. Reading the text will help because they give a lot of examples for relationships and all of that fun stuff. So starting off, interpersonal communication occurs simultaneously with another person. I'm sorry about that. My neighbor started screaming. Anyway, interpersonal communication occurs simultaneously with another person to attempt to mutually influence each other, usually for the purpose of managing relationships. And so basically, this just kind of means that interpersonal, it has to do with another person versus intrapersonal. So INTRA, intrapersonal is going to be like inward communication, and interpersonal is communicating outward. All right. And then interpersonal relationships. So impersonal versus interpersonal. So in interpersonal relationships, you make predictions based on information about the other person. You use knowledge of the other person as a unique person as a basis for the interaction, versus impersonal will be more so, making guesses based on norms, responding to their roles rather than who they are. And so interpersonal are more so personal relationships. If you kind of think of the suffixes, impersonal means that it's not personal. I know it's kind of it's interesting. English is a crazy language, I think, sometimes. Man, I really hope the audio does not fuck up on this because I'm going to be very sad if I have to record this again. But there are two types of relationships. There are relationships of circumstance, and I'm sorry that this kind of looks weird, but a relationship of circumstance is going to be a relationship that develops because your lives overlap. And so this would be friends that you have at work because you're friends, or it could be, relationships that you had in high school because you guys were in close proxemics to one another. And if you kind of go back to some of the earlier chapters when we talk about like attention, selection, that kind of process kind of explains this a little bit more too, if y'all remember all of that. But then the second type of relationships are ones of choice. And so that relationship is intentionally sought out and developed. And so these are the relationships that sometimes they can be both. But usually this of circumstance will be more of the impersonal relationships, and of choice tends to be the interpersonal. So reasons for relationship initiation. There could be interpersonal attraction, and that could be through similarity. So for example, because we have similar interests, I want to be their friend. Then there's physical and sexual attraction. That one's pretty simple. Proximity, like I mentioned earlier, that has to do with location. Like I want to be friends with my neighbor, so that way we can hang out together because we live so close together. Um, Complementary has to do, it's similar to similarity, except different. So because this person is different than me, I can appreciate the things that they have that I don't. And those are just a few of the interpersonal reasons that the book talks about when choosing relationships. All right. And then relationship maintenance requires self-disclosure. So self-disclosure occurs when we provide information to others that they would not know unless we told them. Sorry, my cat's going crazy. So why do we self-disclose? And so the purpose is to deepen relationships. It clarifies our understanding of both ourselves and others. And it kind of fulfills that need to be known. So self-disclosure is kind of an important process, like think about any time that, you've had that close one-to-one heart to heart with your friend, and just afterwards it feels like you guys are a lot closer with your relationship. So how should we self-disclose? There, oh, there are three parts of self-disclosure. There's reciprocity, there's appropriateness, and there is risk. And all three are kind of necessary for self-disclosure to occur. Reciprocity kind of refers to how receptive and how responsive another person is when you're self-disclosing. So for example, if one person is doing the sharing, it kind of negates that level of reciprocity, because it can make you feel as though someone may have this knowledge to hold over you. Appropriateness just kind of refers to the appropriateness of the disclosure. If you just met someone for the first time, you're not going to talk about all the hard things you had to go through as like a child or anything like that, just because it would be more so like, oh, like that's a lot all at once. And so you have to consider the appropriateness. And then risk is always going to be a part of self-disclosure, because the other person can always, choose to cut off that relationship or choose to do whatever they want with the information that you disclosed. And so a model of self-disclosure is the theory of social penetration, and that has to do with Altman and Taylor, and it's frequently called the onion theory. Fun fact, I love Shrek, but it's called the onion theory because of the breadth and depth. So if you remember, what do ogres have? Layers. What do people have? People also have layers. There's the circumference of the onion, and then there's also each different layer within. So the theory predicts that relationships become more intimate as the self-disclosure grows in breadth and depth. So it essentially states, the more sensitive and the wide range of topics that you discuss with someone will make that relationship closer. And so each relationship represents a degree of social penetration. And so this is more of that exact model image that they made of it, instead of just like the Shrek onion. But if you see, there's these various different topics, and of course, like these are just examples of topics. But as you can see, there's little arrows pointing inward to each layer of a person. So for example, in this layer, they don't really discuss money that much, but religion and politics are something that they've discussed with. And essentially the theory just kind of states the more topics you discuss at a greater depth will inherently make your relationship more intimate. That doesn't always mean in a positive way. It just means that there will be a closer level of intimacy towards that person. And the Johari window reflects three elements. So the stages of relational development, the degree of self-awareness, and others' perceptions. And so this chart is completely different from the other model. This one is more so a way to describe information. So kind of like we mentioned before, as intimacy increases, self-knowledge increases. And this more so has to do, the Johari window is more so about yourself and how communicating with others changes the way you see yourself versus the theory of penetration is more so regarding two relationships and making it more intimate. But for example, for some information that's known to self and known to others, that would be open. So for example, you all know I'm a teacher. I know I'm a teacher. Therefore, that is open information. And then there's information that's known to self but unknown to others, and that's hidden information. And so that would be, you know, any type of secrets I have, something that I haven't been sharing with the class, blah, blah, blah. And then there's unknown to self and known to others, and that would be blind. So for example, say I didn't know that like the background of my videos were like really distracting, but all of you guys know that would be something I'm blind to. And then if it's unknown to self and unknown to others, obviously it's just unknown. And this is just a way to kind of categorize information and kind of that process of learning about yourself. So what are the stages of relational development? There are two kind of specific stages that the book talks about, and that there's relational escalation and there's relational de-escalation. And so the escalation model refers to, escalation, elevator, just think of it going up. It's basically the positive side of a relationship. It's getting to know someone and developing that into a more intimate relationship. So for example, it starts with the pre-interaction awareness. This one's in red because sometimes people don't always have this, but for example, say that you you're friends with someone in class and you know them because one of your friends knows them. That kind of leads you into some awareness of who they are before you actually have to interact with them. And then initiation, that would be whenever you're gonna go and talk to them, exploration, intensification, and intimacy. And I'm gonna go over those a bit more in detail as well. And so this is becoming aware of the, as I mentioned, the pre-interaction awareness is becoming aware of one's interaction to another person, observe the person or talk to a third party person about it. It's basically any type of interaction that isn't direct. So if you remember that indirect and direct messaging in verbal messages that we went over. And so do we always move past this stage? Sometimes we don't. Sometimes people don't. Sometimes the relationships that we make don't always become more intimate, and that's okay. And so initiation, that is going to be the first contact with someone that you desire a relationship with. And the reason they kind of emphasize like relationships is because the study was done on romantic relationships. And I think sometimes people have an easier time applying this to romantic relationships, but I would argue that this applies to any relationship. It can be familial, it can be platonic, while including romantic. And so this is usually characterized by asking and answering questions and kind of small talk. This is the very, one of the first stages of getting to know someone and actually talking to them. Exploration is Sharing more in-depth information, may have minimal physical contact, and you may limit the amount of time you spend together. It's basically that second stage where you're like, okay, this person's interesting. I would like to get to know them a bit more. And so you're engaging in that social theory of penetration. And so one assumes that the more you learn about a person, the more you'll like them, which can lead to intensification, which is the fourth step. And so this will kind of create more codependent situations. You know, you both depend on each other for self-confirmation, you know, asking their opinion, personalize their language. You know, do you have inside jokes with your friends? That is a level of intensification. You know, frequency and level of shared personal information increase, and that they may decide to label their communication. Like I said, this was written with romantic relationships in mind. So this is when this is that stage where you genuinely start to enjoy the other person as a person, if that makes any sense. And so they throw out some examples. Again, romantic relationships are just kind of the easiest to look at. You know, they have a matching shirt together, they're wearing a matching outfit. She think my tractor's sexy, I think his tractor's sexy. You know, it's kind of maybe outside wasn't such a good idea, but whatever, we're already here. But these are some examples of that. And so intimacy, so this is providing a primary confirmation of each other's self-concept, with communication highly personalized and synchronized, and a commitment to maintaining the relationship might even be formalized. And so this is kind of that last stage, that where ideally you would have the most amount of intimacy, and you would be essentially the closest you can get to a person. And so now that we went over escalation in the elevator model, we're going to go over de-escalation. And so this is going to be how relationships kind of break down. God, it's windy. So usually it'll kind of start with turmoil, and again, it's in red just because sometimes that stage doesn't always need to occur. Then there will be stagnation, intensification, individualization, and separation, and then potentially post-interaction. So starting with the turmoil stage, it can involve an increase in conflict. Communication is often tense. Interactions are difficult and forced. Partners often become complacent, and communication and physical contact decrease. So you can think of the turmoil stage, honestly, as the beginning of a fight. You know, both parties are just kind of hostile, but not hostile enough to like do anything about it just yet, more so passive aggressive tendencies. And now moving on to de-intensification. And so this significantly decreases the interaction, increased distance, and decreased dependence on the other for self-confirmation. I really hope my audio doesn't get messed up from this. Okay, but basically the de-intensification is the process where relationships just become less important. You're not going to that person for validation anymore, leading to individualization. So defining their lives more as individuals, less as a couple, more I and me versus we and us, with limited interactions and low physical intimacy. And so this stage just kind of refers to, you know, spending more time by yourself, doing things you like, and focusing on the I and me. And then separation, you know, it's an intentional decision to minimize or eliminate further interaction, dividing property, resources, friends. Usually these interactions are tense and difficult. Post-interaction. Now, this is kind of the stuff that doesn't have as much studies, so they will have lasting effects on a relationship. Sometimes people will engage in grave dressing. So that is, the story we tell about the breakup or the dissolutions of the relationship. When your mom asks you what happened, weren't you talking to this person, and you kind of have to put a little pretty bow on it and be like, yep, that's over. And this can kind of have more, it can make things more confusing than they need to be. Think about like on and off relationships, people who, continue hooking up with their exes. That kind of behavior can end up being really confusing and just make things worse than where they started, for various different reasons. And so relational dialects are kind of how we change and revolve around handling tensions. And so this is kind of more of the detailed way that relationships can either escalate or de-escalate. So there's integration, separation, and that kind of goes towards autonomy and connection. So how involved are we in each other's lives? How much can you be you without needing me, and how much can I be me without needing you? But also, what is that level of connection? Then there is stability change. So that goes with predictability and novelty. So, how often is the person or the persons engaging in the same predictable behavior, and how much are they not? Then expression privacy goes to openness and closedness. How forthcoming is someone being, and how more reserved are they being? So, what is interpersonal conflict? I guess I forgot to fill this part out, but conflict is basically any tensions or any kind of, I hate to say like undesired feeling that occurs between two people who are mutually dependent on one another. So think about how we were talking about like interpersonal relationships. These are the people who you choose to be around and who you like to be friends with. There is another definition for conflict, but this one specifically has to do with interpersonal. And so it's going to be between two people who are mutually dependent on one another and who perceive incompatible needs, scarce resources, or a climate of hostility from the other person. And so I would more so focus on that perception of incompatible needs, scarce resources, or a climate of hostility. Then this part, just because I feel like that's a more important part of the definition. But I also want to say that this part wasn't as focused on in the quiz, question mark. And I'm not going to go over the 7 types of conflict in detail because the book does a really good job at going over each and every one of them. But basically there's 7 different types of conflict that can happen in a relationship. There is constructive conflict, which is, most of these also have like pretty simple context clues. Then there's destructive, pseudo conflict, simple conflict, ego conflict, serial arguments, and irresolvable conflict. And so, yeah, I hope that you guys enjoyed this lecture video. I hope that it wasn't too loud and it wasn't too long. And thank you for watching.